All right, welcome back to another episode of Culture Camp featuring Potentia. We got David Spader and Leigh Quinn. David, Leigh, thank you for being on the show.
Great to be here.
Great to be
I'm,
back.
I'm really excited about this subject, and this subject kind of came after last week's podcast because of all three of our experiences with family business and how to deal with family, because sometimes those emotions and those family ties and significant others, whether it's husband and wife or kids or whatever it is, seems to be a little bit different. And so we're going to have a two-part episode, two-part series with this family business, because we could talk forever about it. And so the first part I want to ask you guys is, what is your history with family business, and what have you guys done with that?
Well, I'll start first since my family, I'm very fortunate, started a business in 1880
Wow.
in Boston, Irish Catholic, great-great-grandparents. I'm fifth generation. And they started it by making white shoe polish for the leather smocks that the Irish workers would use. So they would have clean smocks to go back to work periodically.
Wow.
So from there, it grew, and it grew into making finishes for shoes. So over time, my grandfather's generation created the instant shoe shine. So many people would know it as scuffy shoe polish. And now Kiwi is the known product. We no longer have that. And then from there, expanded into other products. So in World War I, World War II, we supplied all the shoe polish for the soldiers' boots. We also created, patent leather had existed, but my grandfather expanded it into a larger production. And from there, it moved on from that into polymers, such as making bullet-resistant glass. So we made a film that would go between polycarbonate glass. Instead of doing multiple layers of glass for protection of bulletproofness, we were able to make thinner layers. So in construction and automobiles and everything else, I got involved as fifth generation early on in my life, but I really became directly involved in the 80s, where I went over to Asia and I learned the business in Asia. We were worldwide. From there, I met a few people, and one of my uncles was very interested in getting out of volatile organics. So anybody today who's worried about climate change or pollution, we were looking at ways in which to use chemicals without allowing volatiles to go in the air. So that was ultraviolet light and electron beam. One of our first clients was Callaway Golf.
Really?
So the first Big Bertha steel and then titanium had a clear coat on it, and that was ultraviolet light, and we were the supplier for that.
Wow.
We then got involved in compact disc coatings. We were one of the only ones manufacturing in the U.S. Everybody else was outside.
Now, Leigh, I think maybe we should stop though, because
I think you should
Jason's,
stop
those
there.
of you that can't see Jason, he's in awe. He now
That's right.
views you as golf royalty for what you did with Callaway Golf. He has a newfound respect there. So I just want to make sure people know the look on Jason's face was
Leigh. I've known Leigh for how many years, and Leigh's been hiding some stuff from me. So yeah, we're gonna have to have a conversation, Leigh.
It's true. And when I'm sharing with you, some people don't probably know what a CD is or a DVD. But anyway, the thing that I want to share is, and I thank you, David, for jumping in there, is that it was a great journey for me. We'll get into a little bit more detail what it did for me to become a leader and how to develop and how I got to this point. But being in a 5-generation business with 3 generations working in the business by the time I got to it, there's a lot of learning and a lot of understanding about complementary skills, my motivations and capabilities. But I'd like to hear a little bit more of David, because David, actually, his family was extremely close to Dr. O'Connor. And I think David's father is one of the individuals who helped derive a lot of Dr. O'Connor's work, of which Potentia is developing and using now.
Right.
Yeah. So as Leigh and I were discussing this particular session, we were comparing notes on family business, and it was interesting because Leigh was really one of the first ones in his family to start using some of the intellectual property now, the assessments, the concepts, and brought those into the family business. I, on the other hand, was on the receiving end. My father was a follower of Dr. O'Connor and his work with DISC and values and all those other things. So I mentioned that I didn't realize it at the time, but Dr. O'Connor was doing some work for my father's business, and he was invited to our house for dinner, and that was really not just to have him for dinner. Well, certainly that was part of it because he and my father are great friends. I think it was also my first job interview, and so he was learning about me as he was asking what I was doing in college and other things, and then I ended up doing more work with him in college, and we've had a relationship for a long time. But that certainly influenced fit with me and role. And when I decided to go back to the family business after graduating and working for a couple of organizations and looking at the fit. So it's interesting, when I came into the family business, I was a complement to my older brother who was taking over. Right. And so that analysis had been done with my father and Dr. O'Connor and my older brother to say, what kind of fit would David be? So that was a different experience than what Leigh had, where you just kind of force fit people maybe into roles based on expectations or what's available, not what are their passions, what are their capabilities, some of those other things. And now I want to say that also helped us grow our business. My father will say, he wouldn't have been able to do what he did without first understanding himself. And he first reached out to Dr. O'Connor when he had gone through, I think it was like 4 or 5 bookkeepers in 1 or 2 years early on when his business was small. And Dr. O'Connor helped him understand why he was hiring the wrong people. But he came from a farm, right. Oldham, South Dakota, population roughly 500, 1942. He was actually still using horses on the family farm when he was growing up.
Wow.
Grew the business, started selling a few RVs off of the family farm with my grandfather, then grew it as he wanted to go to college in through high school, eventually moved it to Sioux Falls, South Dakota. After going to Brookings, South Dakota, then his mentor said, you got to go bigger town. Sioux Falls was a metropolis in South Dakota at the time.
Yeah. I've been there with your brother. And
this is back probably when it was only, 40,000 people, it's what, 300,000 now, I think.
Wow.
Somewhere right around there.
I just remember it was so cold. We didn't go anywhere besides the Ruby Tuesdays.
Didn't have to leave the hotel.
Didn't have to leave the hotel.
Yeah. And so he went from essentially, the family was known for their high quality hogs, to a business owner, and Dr. O'Connor really, really helped him grow the business to a point where, a few years ago, my brother sold the business, and that will go into that maybe some other time on all the choices along the way, still why certain choices were made. And I just lost my train of thought. Sorry, guys. But so he went from small farm to, we worked with more than 7,000 businesses throughout North America, looking at financial trends, conducting leadership development, like when you and I met, Jason, but also having a large consultancy and 20 group business CEO groups with more than 7,000 businesses. So, and I'm one of 7. I know Leigh's part of a large Catholic family as well. Maybe not quite as many as 7, and all of us have worked with the family business at one time or another.
No, that's awesome. And your family business is how we met, and then through that is how I met Leigh. So
right.
Thank you to John for keeping it going, and Dwayne and everybody. Shout out to the Spader family for crushing it and being super impactful in my industry and in really helping me in a lot of ways. So we kind of got the history down. What was your guys' favorite part about working in a family business, throughout your guys' careers?
Well, for me, it was getting the opportunity to work with my dad. So I had a hiatus of almost 10 years before I went full time into the family business. That's another story that I won't get into at this moment. However, what drove me, and David talked about this earlier, complementary skills, but what drove me into the business was having an opportunity to be with my dad, working with my dad. He's a great guy, very sharp at business, took a lot of risks, was successful at what he did. And I thought, here's an opportunity to learn. Also, to be honest, I wanted to be successful on my own before going into a family business. So I had a good career going that I easily could have kept going. outside of the family business. So when I went back in, it wasn't Leigh is just coming back because he needs a job. So when we talk a little bit about it, that multi-generational piece was also a component. My grandfather was still alive. He was actively involved with the board. I had two uncles that were involved in the business. At that time, my younger brother, I'm from a family of six, had not gotten involved yet, but would eventually, and that I enjoyed very much. So being part of that multiple generation was terrific. The other part was we're very entrepreneurial. So as you take a look at Dr. O'Connor's work, one of my passions is actually being an entrepreneur.
Right.
Another passion of mine is being intellectual. I'm curious. I like to learn new things of things that I like. So let's be clear about it. If it's something I don't like, I'm not digging deep into. Jason, you can relate to that, but
100%.
you also, when you want to, you dig in deeply. But that was my favorite part. And most of all, I have to say his integrity is above reproach. And we'll talk about a little bit later about managing my values and how my journey got me to that point. But I have to say that period of time working directly with my dad, having responsibility, allowing me to go off and build a whole new business unit after a few years of understanding the business, because I basically did every job since 15 or 16, from maintenance all the way to manufacturing, to working in the lab, to answering phones, to dealing with sales. So
Wow.
like David, probably like you, Jason, you learned everything from soup to nuts before you really got into any sort of meaningful directional role.
Right. Right. Yeah. I mean, similar. I went and built a career before I wanted to be like, I didn't want to be Randy's son, always
Correct.
just that
Yep.
shadow. I wanted to go build my career. So, but yeah, I can totally relate to that. What about you, David? What was your favorite part?
Oh, my favorite part, a couple of different components. So the first part, I would say on a personal level, it is working with family, but also seeing the impact from some of the sacrifices that, some of my forebears made and family had made in order to build the business, and seeing the impact that had on lots of others, whether those working in the business and what they're able to provide to them and the good livelihoods and careers. And, I think my father had a knack for finding people diamonds in the rough and giving them opportunities they went to had other places and watching them blossom and grow into roles, and seeing that impact as well. And then with the consulting role and training and that we did, I remember the first couple of years I was in the family business and would attend trade shows and other things. The number of people that sought me out and just said, I don't know if you know this, but because of your father, I still have my family business. And not only do I have it, it's thriving where we used to struggle. And
That's
so
awesome.
that's just a very fulfilling thing.
I love that. I'm sure that means a lot.
Yeah, and on a little bit more global scale, we talk about these, what's satisfying and fulfilling to us. One of the parts that's also very fulfilling is that I really do believe the family business, small business entrepreneur, is the heart of America. It's what was able to build America into what it is, and that entrepreneurial spirit is important. And there's a passion that comes with when your own money is on the line, when your sweat, blood, and tears have made the business. There's a passion and a commitment there that when you help almost every entrepreneur, they all want to build something bigger than themselves, and they define that differently, and they can get in their own way sometimes. And we know that that's never happened in any of our family businesses. None of us have ever gotten in each other's way.
Right.
But with help, we really learn we can really do some amazing things. And I think that's great to be a part of that and be invited into those families and those businesses is an honor, especially when we can help them do something greater than themselves, which is often.
Absolutely. I mean, I still talk with a dealer buddy of mine that went to the TM1 and then went to your leadership classes before he ever even opened up a store, and he's still doing very well because of the foundation that you guys did for him, or laid for him. So I know he talks about it all the time, and he's still, I think, he's still practicing, all those things. So now let's get into what is your least favorite part, because I get asked this all the time is how, like, there's a lot of good things. There also is a lot of bad things. There's a lot of feelings, a lot of emotions when it comes into family. What was your least favorite part about
Okay, so
family business?
first, I'm going to say, Jason, I'm not going to air a lot of dirty laundry about my family on this podcast.
Yeah,
I'm
we
not one
both
of
have
those
agreed that's not
podcasters, and I know Lee's not. So
Right.
Lee's even more private than I am, oftentimes. So
Right.
no, but we've certainly had plenty of challenges. We will share some of those with you all. But I would say one of the hardest things or most challenging things to work with is capacity issues when working with family business. And so let me say a little bit more about that by what I mean. And if you've listened to the other podcasts, we look at human performance and people in both our motivations and our capabilities.
Right.
And what's the hardest is when you have a committed family member that loves the work, that puts in the hours, puts in the effort, does everything in their power to perform, but doesn't have the capacity to perform at the level the business needs them to.
Right.
And you need to have that tough discussion with them that, as much as you've tried, all the right intent, we just can't keep you in the role because it hurts the business.
Right.
And that's the most difficult. If someone's, not committed, if they're screwing around and aren't serious, it's a little easier to have those conversations. But the toughest ones are those when people are highly motivated. They're
Yeah.
doing everything within their power to perform, it just lack the capacity. And
Right.
we all have a top at some point. I'm not going to build a rocket. I'm just not. I don't have
Right.
that engineering in me, right? My wife's a brain surgeon. I know I can't do her job. I don't have that capacity.
Right.
So recognizing where that is, and then helping on the flip side, if you can help those people earlier on in the process, a lot of times we don't have to get to that. We can head it off before and find a better role, either
sure.
internal or external to the organization.
For
But
sure.
those, I think, for me, that's the hardest part of working with family businesses, when you have those people that are committed and trying, and you don't have what it takes.
Right. No, for sure. What about you, Leigh?
Well, I could build on David's point there. It is tough. It's also tough to see when I've experienced watching, didn't happen to me, but watching others that brought a lot that were undervalued, that people didn't appreciate their dedication, their commitment, their loyalty, their willingness, personal sacrifice of time, effort, and energy for the family business. In some ways, as David said, it impacts relationships in the family, not only between family members, but within that individual's personal life. For me, I think one of the hardest things was I had to travel all the time, and having a young family and watching them grow and realizing that I was missing out on many, many things. That was very hard. And, David can understand this. He's probably experienced it with his family. But I learned early on, and my mother was a wise woman, to say, when you come home, the family's already running without you. Find out what's been going on first before you start correcting anything.
Right. That's good. That's good advice.
Yes. So take your time, recalibrate, because those times would be I'd be gone for a couple of weeks in a row. So, and then having experienced that with my dad being away for a long time, and then watching how they manage that, candidly, if it's done well, you don't feel it because both parents, both family members are engaged in making sure that the rest of the family's brought along. But that was probably the one the least, and just seeing people potentially being undervalued that are bringing a lot more to the table than others are recognizing.
Right. No, that makes sense. I mean, I'll say just quick, the hardest part for me is just being able to turn it off. You go to
Yeah,
a
that's a
birthday,
great
Christmas,
point,
Thanksgiving,
Jason.
all that stuff. It's like business, 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 business. And, an
Right.
issue happened the day before Christmas, and then you're talking about it all Christmas.
Yeah,
And it's like,
Thanksgiving dinner, there's a conversation about it.
yeah. It's been, I mean, right now I'm not doing anything with family, and it's kind of been nice to go to my like Sunday dinners and things like that and just be like, how are you doing? Because like with me personally, like I've never really had that relationship with my dad or my mom because they're both business people other than business. So it's like,
Right.
what did you do today? Like it's kind of fun, but like,
Jason, that reminds me, I forgot. It's probably been close to 20 years ago. I was working with someone who was trying to break that habit.
mhm.
And I said, "Well, how serious are you?" They said, "I just hate it. I know that the rest of my family just tells me I need to stop talking about work, and I do it over and over and over again, and it causes friction and family holidays." I said, "Well, I think I can fix it for you pretty quickly." He said, "Well, what are you going to do?" I said, "Tell all the kids you'll give them $100 bill if they catch you talking about work."
That's funny.
He said it took $200 before he was done.
Yeah, it's like, I'm not saying anything anymore.
That's
So it
great.
fixed it
I
fixed
love
it
it.
pretty quickly, because at first I said, maybe $5. He's like, "Yeah, that's probably good." I said, "Well, if you're really serious, keep bumping it up."
That's funny. Yeah, no, it's I should have done that because lots of conversations about it, but it's all good now. So when working with a family business, where do you start? Like, where do you start when working with a family business? Because it's there's a lot of, like, again, we talk about like emotions, or I'm not going to say entitlement, but sometimes by age there's like
There
a
can be.
hierarchy and thing. Yeah, it could be entitlement. And so where do you start when you work with a family business?
So anytime, in some ways, it's like we would with any business. We start with discovery work, so gathering lots of information before we make a diagnosis and a decision about what we're going to do. So, while with the caveat that every situation is a little bit different, and there's always a little discovery work before we go in.
Right.
When it's in general, "Hey, can you just overall help our family business navigate a path forward?" I start with talking to every family member who is currently in the family business, and or is likely to be in the family business in the moderately near future. So even within 4 to 5 years, if there's, someone's at university or even in high school that has a plan to come into the family business. And very importantly, that always includes spouses that may not work in the family business.
Wow.
And because, as we all know, we're all married. When we go home, our spouses have influence on us.
Yep.
Okay. And they're part of the family. And
Right.
so, in making a decision of going into a family business or committing or being part of the family business, we really want to understand where they are and what their perspective is, because sometimes they have the best view as well. Because
Right.
especially when they're outsiders that have come in, they see things differently. And so
Yep.
they're a wonderful resource, but at other times there's untapped resources that Leigh mentioned before. We actually worked together with one client, and they ended up bringing a family member who wasn't in the family business in over time. And because they had that outside in, and like all of us, three of us as well, they went out and got experience outside the family business first. So brought a perspective and a skill set the business needed moving forward that wasn't there.
Right.
So that's really important to do that. And in particular, remember those people that don't directly in the family business, but we know family business is a big circle and it affects everybody. So if you can bring them in, that's always where we start. And then the issues tend to sort themselves out pretty quickly after you start bringing people in the right way.
The right way.
No, yeah,
Yeah, and
my wife always says there's nothing more than a wife or a woman's intuition, and sometimes I would avoid having a conversation with her about something because I don't want her to be right. So, like, I'm in my own feelings. Just let me be in my own feelings for a little bit, and I'll talk to you later.
yeah, let me be there for a little bit.
I may or
Yeah.
may not be guilty of that as well occasionally,
So
Jason.
I
Or she'll
sit
warn me
here.
of something, and I'm like, no, 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 you're wrong. And then 6 months later, I'm like, you were right. I don't
You're
admit
right,
this, but you were right.
exactly.
Yeah.
Well,
Sometimes I've even given her a little trophy that says it's the "you're
yeah.
right" trophy.
Well, just by saying it, that's the trophy enough,
Yep.
I think. You know, yes, we'll start, if we can, interview all the family members. Now,
Yes. True.
David's situations many a time allow him to do that, which is terrific, and it's the ideal way to do it. The other part is, I think all three of us have the ability and have had the experience since you've been in a family business. One of the things I learned is I knew how to ask the right questions and know how to move forward carefully, because, like you say, in family business there are emotions. So I will always make sure, like David and I have talked about in the past with you, Jason, start with the leader, the owner at the time. And It doesn't matter the size of the business, honestly, when it's there are very large family businesses that we've worked with, with hundreds and hundreds of people, even thousands, and there are smaller businesses where it could be 10 or 12. It's interesting enough, the problems are not much different. Certainly the pressures aren't much different. But the most important thing is to find out what we both like to do is find out what the goals and aspirations are of the current owner of the business. Now, it could be two family members. It could be a husband and wife. It could be two brothers. You've had your experience with your in-laws, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so again, it's just asking the questions and then be able to look at them with the ability the reason why they get with us and why you get with us, Jason, is they trust that we already understand their situation and the experience they're going through.
Mm-hmm.
And from there, we want to help them understand, okay, like David said earlier, what are the complementary skills that exist right now with the people that you have? What are the gaps that you have? And how can we accelerate your ability to move and succeed the way you want to, but also increase your satisfaction along the way?
Right.
But again, it's a delicate balance between moving forward and slowing down with them. I also have to say, working with family business because they're entrepreneurs, it is a wonderful experience getting to work with them. And really, once you've been with them for a long time, which both David and I are very fortunate with many companies, actually you become almost part of the family.
Right.
And that you can be, and it's an exciting part to be a trusted advisor at a certain point.
Right.
And I consider it, like David does, an honor to even get close to that level with a family.
I love that, and I think that's so true.
And the origin stories are often so amazing.
Yeah,
How they got into
unbelievable.
business. It's always wonderful to hear those.
For sure. Like Leigh, I'm gonna have to call you about your story. Honestly, I don't think I've ever asked you what you do, what you did. So yeah, now I'm fascinated because I'm kind of blown away.
My wife kids me. I've had 5 careers. She just says, "Okay, what's your next one?" And here I am.
No, I
Well,
love
an
it.
entrepreneur with a high intellectual work interest, that makes sense, right, Leigh?
Yeah.
5?
Yeah.
That's awesome.
And so that's actually a good point with family businesses as well. When we begin the formal aspect, if we're looking at fit and best role, that's where Potentia's tools become so helpful.
For sure.
And so when Leigh said, we start with talking about the owner's aspirations, which is always the most important place to start because they have the control and they've earned the right to decide what the next steps are.
Right.
And then we look at those motivations and aspirations as well of the other people to help them understand where their natural energy is, because more than once, all too often, people end up in a role in a family business because the oldest is going to take over and the youngest then gets this role, or the next one gets this role, because they're in sequential order, not because it's their passion or motivation first, and then second, are they the most capable one to do that? And so oftentimes, and there are all kinds of other things that can come, biases that can come in as to who should be pigeonholed into what role. And I will comfortably say this, a lot of times there are biases between what roles men should go into and women should go into. And our tools help us instead step back and say, no, who has the right fit? And be objective there, where it's very difficult because of all the social norms, expectations we're in that may keep us from being in the role that we're truly passionate about.
Right. No, that's such a good tip right there. That's awesome.
I remember I was in one with one family business, about 15 people, really tight family business, receiving in a really big growth period. And I went through and I was talking to people, and because of one of the assessments we used, I asked one of the women who had a really key role in the organization, and one of the daughters, a daughter-in-law actually, I said, so, well, this is interesting you have this interest over here that, doesn't really fit with the role. How do you handle that? Like, what would you love to do if you could do anything without worrying about income, anything else? What would you do? And she says, I have always had a passion for photography in my life. And I would love to be a still photographer and do some other things. And I said, well, that's really kind of cool. And I do a little bit on my own, but I haven't really shared that with anyone else. And the whole family got together, and I asked if it was okay to share that. And she said, sure. I said, did you guys, any of you know that she has this passion and this interest? And they all stopped and they're like, well, that makes a lot of sense. What can we do to support you? And she felt like she needed to stay in that role because she was good at it in the organization. But when she shared it with the whole family, they all basically said, why are you doing this? What you're doing, that sounds miserable if this is what you want to be doing.
Right.
And so that was a great example where the tools helped us unearth, a fit that was better. And unfortunately it meant, well, not unfortunately, fortunately, it meant she got to leave, but had permission from everybody else because her family loved her and wanted her doing what she loved.
Right. And I'm sure that there's a certain type of pressure there that now, is relieved. The super helpful. I got great tip right there. Leigh, I know we're kind of coming up on time right now. Is there like a last tip that you're like, oh, I want to say this for, if someone's in a family business, starting a family business, what is like the tip that you would give them?
Well, the tip I just going to add to what David talked about. One of the things is, and I did this with my dad, is have an agreement ahead of time about how you're going to operate, how, even though it's father son, he is still the CEO of the company, and there are things that in a meeting I need to interact with him in that way, not as my dad.
Right.
The other part of it is just like David said, is getting really clear what your passions are, what you're really good at. And the piece that I did before I entered the business is I had this conversation with if this doesn't work out, I want to be able to step away, and knowing that I'm stepping away, not because it has anything to do with you or others. It's just, it's not the right fit for me.
Right.
And I came to that journey. I mean, literally, that's how my other business started in 2002. And what was wonderful is the encouragement he gave me, like Dave was talking about, to pursue what I realized was my passion, which is to getting out doing what we're doing here today.
Right.
And the only way I learned that was because he also gave me a chance to be part of a CEO group. And you've been part of those mentor groups, be like a 20 group that the Spaders run, where I was with other owners within the same area that I lived, non-competing businesses, and we were learning together. And we were starting to use some of Dr. O'Connor's tools in these sessions. And I understood the gap between what I was able to do as a leader to what I needed to do as a leader.
Right.
And I had this thriving desire to learn, how do I become the best I can be in this area? So the big tip, though, is make sure there's clarity about exiting.
Right.
Not only entering, and secondly, about why my role is what it is at the time, but where should I be and what is the actual best fit for me in the company. Not knowing when I start, but knowing when to make the move and make some agreements as family members. So,
right. No, that totally makes sense. And I think that's great advice, because I don't think, I mean, it's kind of like an operating agreement, but a little extra because it's family, So I like that. So David, Leigh, thank you so much for being on this episode. I love it because it's something I've been dealing with for or been involved in a family business for a very long time, and it is very, very different, but it's also super fun. And there's nothing better than, I believe, like, than hanging out with your family. And most of the time, like, my brother's my best friend, so it's like just getting to hang out and do things together. So again, thank you so much. If you like this episode, please share it. Remember to go to potentia.solutions if you want more information on P6 and the assessments. Hit me up on Instagram, Jason Haugen, and we will see you on the next episode of Culture Camp. Thank you.